and the amplification of injustices and economic imbalance. So this is what concerns me the most, if you like, from my point of view. It's the sort of problem area where I would like to think of possible solutions. And definitely Web 3.0, or the ideas around Web 3.0, are offering us a new opportunity, if you like.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mahan here with Tech Circus, back with another interview ahead of the Web 3.0 conference at the end of January. I'm joined today by George Zarkadakis, CEO of Voxiberate, Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council, author, playwright, and artificial intelligence engineer. Welcome, George.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the
It's a great pleasure to have you as well. Thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it. So I suppose just to jump in, what do you see as the issues of the Web 2 model at the moment? And then we can kind of go on to the Web 3 a bit and see some solutions. You know, what's the problem really? Or, well, I know there's many, but
Absolutely. So as you rightly say, there are several issues. And, for example, network security being a huge one. But what I would like to kind of like drill down, if you like, is the externalities, the economic and social externalities of Web 2.0. And by those words, what I mean is the social impact, the power imbalance that exists in the digital economy, the fact that, data and power and money are concentrated in the hands of very few people, in a handful of big tech companies that control the game. And the result is, well, we can talk about the results, right? Certainly one of the results is lack of innovation and the amplification of injustices and economic imbalance. So this is what concerns me the most, if you like, from my point of view. It's the sort of problem area where I would like to think of possible solutions. And definitely Web 3.0, or the ideas around Web 3.0, are offering us a new opportunity, if you like, to do something about it and correct some of the mistakes, the imbalances, the injustices that have propagated because of that Web 2.0, the social and mobile web that most of us are familiar with.
Yeah, and a lot of the people I've spoken with that are kind of working on things in Web3 that is one of the main motivations as well. It's almost like we've had this period of time to reflect on the issues that have gone on for the last, since maybe the 2010s or the kind of launch of Web2 properly. And people have kind of gone, oh, okay, there's these like core issues and we need to kind of rethink the web. And I wonder then, I suppose, what is it in Web3 that you see is doing that? I know a lot of people I've spoken to have different aspects. Like I spoke to Donnie Bullers, who's the CEO of Tomb Technologies, and they're building social media that's Web3, and that's kind of without the, I suppose, the data capture of the Web 2 model. What kind of cases do you see there, George, for Web3?
So let me try to answer that question by going back a step a little bit into Web 2.0. What has been the experience of Web 2.0? Because it's very easy to get very technical and talk, for example, about data being centralized as opposed to be decentralized, or, for example, AI algorithms be centralized as opposed to decentralized, and so forth and so on. And this is a very valid conversation, and all those new things coming out from people doing interesting things on Web 3.0 are very, very significant. But I'd like to go a step behind and make a reference to a very interesting interview that Jack Dorsey, the ex-CEO of Twitter, gave to New York Times some time ago, reflecting back on what went wrong with Twitter. Okay, so Twitter is just an example of what went wrong with social media and Web 2.0 in general, right? And we all know what went wrong. Okay, one of the big things that went wrong is this political polarization, is the tearing up of the social contract, anger, destabilization of democracy, which is still with us, right? It hasn't gone away. Okay, and one of the interesting things that he said, and I think this is something that we should all be cognizant of when we are thinking of the new web, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Okay, and I'll come back to that. The danger of repeating the same mistakes. Okay, so what Jack Dorsey said, and I completely agree, was that the big mistake that they did at Twitter is that they were a bunch of technologists thinking with a technologist mindset. Okay, and let me explain what that is, because I am an engineer as well, right? I'm guilty as charged. Okay, so the engineering mindset is always around optimizing something. That's what engineers do, whether you're electrical, mechanical, that's what you're optimizing. You're optimizing around some kind of measure, okay? For example, engagement, okay? All right. We want to optimize around engagement because we think that engagement is good, let's say, for a social media platform, right? Okay. So what does engagement mean? We break this thing down and we kind of like go to the point where we say, okay, if we have more likes and if people retweet and, then we have more engagement, that measure is going up. And then let's build an algorithm that does that super efficiently, right? So we can get there very fast. Okay. So that's the engineering mind. That's what we do. Okay. And we're getting so excited and we build the algorithm and we do it, amazing. It does optimize a super efficient algorithm. Everything's good. But obviously, no one's considered the social implications, right? No one thought about, okay, so what's going to happen once this thing is so highly efficient, whereby, progressives speak among themselves, conservatives speak among themselves, and nobody speaks with each other, right? Okay. And that's what happened with Web 2.0. So Dorsey was saying, okay, we should have engaged more with social scientists, with philosophers, right? With game theorists, okay? So we can, understand the consequences of our design choices before making them, all right? So this is number one, right? Number one is we really need to reflect on the technology tunnel vision, if you like, or that engineering mindset, which is all around optimization. I think this is very important, and maybe we can discuss a little bit how we do that. Okay, so this is truly important, right? And the other thing is, I guess, how do we take decisions ultimately? How do we decide about who decides about our products, right? In the Web 2.0 world, it was always, a bunch of techies, mostly, right? And it seems to me the same thing happens with Web 3.0, right? So although Web 3.0 offers us a huge, huge, huge opportunity to completely, re-engineer and reinvent the digital economy, right? With all the good things that everybody's talking about, I think we should reflect on the difference between what is efficient and what is good. Because sometimes what is efficient is not good, okay? And then the question is, who decides what's good, okay? So hopefully we'll have a conversation with you now.
Exactly.
I know you're a philosopher, so...
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to have to stand up for the philosophers there. But that's something that struck me, is that oftentimes it's not a failure of the technology. The technology is succeeding, but the philosophy that's driving it is the issue. Because if you're going to program an algorithm, to a specific outcome or something, that's all it's going to go for. And engagement, while it might boost on the platform, also might encourage people to become addicted to a specific kind of content, and that could be measured as success. So the externalities, I think, that have become more apparent as time have gone on really do need to be taken into account. But as you've said, George, it's hard to do when you're trying to solve an engineering problem, to think about the ethics of the whole thing. And ethics is so difficult, really. Everything I've done in it is, it's very hard to have a straight line in anything, bringing more ethics into the design and the outcome, but that slows things down. I think it doesn't make it as easy to, So
let me address those two things, right? First of all, let me start from the last thing you said about slowing things down, and let me also address the issue of ethics in practical terms. What does that mean, right? Let's bring it down to the level where we can code. Can we code ethics? All right, let's address this question. So in terms of slowing things down, I think this is this is a reflection of the current culture. And the current culture is all around speeding things up, accelerating, moving fast, breaking things, and so forth. Yeah. This has not served technologists very well. Okay, and we should stop that, actually, right? There's a huge backlash from society against, technologies moving fast and breaking things. This is something that people thought maybe 10, 20 years ago, right? We should not think that way anymore, okay? Because there's regulators out there, there's politicians that are easily spooked by risk. And clearly we have the example of COVID, how easily they can get spooked by risk. And they can quash stuff, right? So I think not only because of that risk, but also because we all want to do the right thing, we should address this culture that says move super fast. Okay, I think we should move as fast as we are comfortable with understanding the possible consequences of our actions, right? So one thing is definitely around culture, okay? And that impacts technology teams, but also their investors, everybody, okay? So we need to have a conversation, in other words, right?
Yeah.
The other thing, okay, so how do we assess things? How do we know what's good? All right, who decides about what's good and what's bad? Okay, so this is a fundamental question of governance, actually, I would argue. Yeah. Okay, there isn't, if we lived in a theocratic society, we would open the holy book, read the holy book, and say, okay, this is right, this is wrong. Okay, and we all decide. Okay, but thankfully, we don't live in societies like that. At least, us here anymore. So the problem is who decides. Okay. So here's the options that we have, Mehon, right? And I, you're a philosopher, so challenge me on this, right? Okay. You can have an authoritarian model of decision. Yep. So a small group of people decides about everything. Take for example, China, or some organization.
Which is what they've done with technology as well, is to put strict rules on it. Government decided, for example, there's a direction of travel for AI, for data, et cetera. So all companies should sort of, obey and abide by the Communist Party diktat. Okay, so that's like an authoritarian model. Yep. Then you have the model that is mostly evident in the West, which it's either, sometimes it's called epistocracy or nocracy, meaning the best decides what's best for us. Okay? And usually that's what happens with technology companies. So there's a bunch of guys, there's you and me and some others, maybe smarter than us, that come together, they've got their PhDs, they're really smart guys, and said, hey, we know what's good for everybody. Okay, we'll build the system and everybody's going to be happy. And this doesn't always work, right? And we have many examples that this thing doesn't work, right? And then we have democracy. Okay? And democracy is where the people decide what's good and what's bad. And the people may make mistakes, by the way. The people are not always wise. But that's the three options we have. There aren't any other options on the table, quite frankly. Okay, and we can calibrate between those three options. Well, that's it. That's it. All right. If you don't have a God that tells you what's good and what's bad, you have to sort it out. All right, with your friends, your mates, and your neighbors. Right. So going back to Web 3.0, I think that there is a great opportunity to democratize the governance of platforms and products through DAOs, okay, decentralized autonomous organizations. And I think, and for me and my team at Voxiberate, this is a space where we are trying to innovate, if you like. Okay, how can we take a model that provides efficiency, mark that word again, and transparency when it comes to taking collective decisions in a platform? How can we transform that model that we think, at least I think, that is deficient right now? How can we transform it into a model that can power innovation and well-being and the thriving of communities across the world? How can we do that? Because if we don't do that, this is my thesis, if we don't do that, we will miss a super opportunity, and Web 3.0 will not be any different from Web 2.0. We'll still have the same monopolies, we'll still have the same, the same power structures, and it'll be a lost opportunity. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. That is, a fantastic assessment of it, George. That was really clarifies the decisions there. And there was something that I was thinking about there as well, which is the meritocracy element of it does make it undemocratic when you have a small group of people that can make decisions that changes everyone's lives. And unfortunately, with network effects nowadays, in order to be competitive, you do often have to sign up to technologies, and you do have to be a part of these things to a certain extent. So it's not,
Let me push back on this point, right?
Okay.
Let me push back on this point, because you're coming with a good argument. But I want to challenge that argument, that there's no alternative. Okay. So usually when we speak about, I've been, you have been, in conversations around business models and revenue models and Excel spreadsheets and all that stuff, most of the conversation, the vast majority of those conversations that take place between, founders, teams, and their investors assume implicitly what is called an extractive economic model. Okay. And that means, how can you create something that can extract value? Like you create the value, and then you extract it and you give it to the shareholders, right? That's what it is. Okay. And obviously some value remains in society. Let's say, for example, the value of Facebook that remains in society is that I can very easily, connect with my friends. All right. But if you compare that value, which is not insignificant, definitely not, with the value that goes into the pockets of the shareholders of Facebook is minuscule, right? This is an extractive economic model. Okay. There are other economic models, however, right, that create value, definitely, but they are usually called generative economic models. Essentially what it means is that there is a sustainability aspect to it and a highly distributive aspect to it as well. To give you an example, a typical example is cooperatives. Okay. And cooperatives have existed for hundreds of years, right? It's not a new business model, okay? And the difference between cooperatives and, corporations is that cooperatives, because they belong to their members, okay, the members can decide on the purpose of the cooperative. So is the purpose of cooperative, for example, to maximize profits? It could well be, absolutely, if they decide so. But often the members decide that definitely there should be profit, because otherwise it's not a sustainable business. But they may decide, for example, that the people who are working there should have their jobs secured somehow, right? So they mandate to their executive team a set of values by which those people live or die, that are very different set of values from the typical sort of corporation that, applies this, extractive economic model on the market. So I hope I'm not becoming too theoretical here, but I'm trying to say is there's another way. Yeah, there's another way.
And do you think the DAO, it represents that other way, in a sense, that the Web3 has an opportunity to make the generative model functional in a way that wasn't possible before Web3?
It was always possible, but now
it hasn't been.
We have a tool that we can apply in the digital economy, right, in a very efficient way. Okay, that we didn't have before. Okay, and I think that's the new thing, right? So think, for example, a platform, an Uber, which is essentially a cooperative, right, based on Web 3.0, right? That's an example. Okay, by using the DAO, by having drivers and perhaps the people who use the service as well as being members of the DAO, you create a completely different dynamic when it comes to how this platform operates. And obviously it operates in a free market, and it has to respond to free market economics, right? In terms of price, how clean are the cars, are they insured, you can hit all those points, and you should, otherwise you're not going to be competitive. But at the same time, you can look after the drivers, right? Make sure that, their income is sustainable. Make sure that there is a safety net for their lives. There's so much other things that you can do, which you can do since you're creating economic value. And you can do because you don't need to extract it and send it to a small minority that essentially what they do is they either buy back their shares or they're not applying their capital necessarily for the social good, right? So the capital is extracted. So by redeploying the capital within the cooperative, I think that is what creates this generative economic model that I'm referring to.
Yeah, and even, I suppose, the concept of value, I suppose economic value, but also then this other kind of value, which is a social cohesion, a type of technology that encourages social cohesion, that's democratic, that's promoting maybe conversations across different lines and connecting people, rather than one that monetizes the maybe inflammatory or like the engagement model, which causes, because of, you know, the more people engage, even if it's polarization, it's seen as success. So that this other model could potentially be used to value bringing people together as a value rather than splitting them apart.
Absolutely. So what you're referring is, you know, an application of that model to social media, how people communicate with each other. Yeah. But we can apply this model across the economy, right? And for example, you know, in the gig economy. Okay, the gig economy right now is highly extractive. Okay, if you think of the creator, I spoke about taxi drivers, right? Think about the creator economy, right? People that create content on social media. Only a tiny fraction makes any money out of that, right? People are spending hours and hours doing videos for YouTube, and they make zero money at all, right? Why? Because the business model of those platforms is set up to monetize only for a small minority, right? We can turn this around. And this is important not because it's right morally or it feels good, because it does clearly. You know, you have to be a really evil person to think that it's a bad idea, right? But it's not just because it's good and nice to have. I think it's also absolutely necessary. As we look forward to an economy where full-time jobs are not going to be as secure as they used to, all right? Where people will be very, you know, if we continue with business as usual, people will not be able to have any predictability in their lives. This will impact how people, you know, decide to have a family. You know, we are talking about a huge danger for our societies to collapse, okay? And if the collapse of democracy means only one thing, it means, you know, a one-way street towards authoritarianism, right? So it's very easy for many of us who haven't lived under dictatorships, you know, who lived in free societies, to lose what we have, which perhaps we don't value it as much as we should. And that would be a disaster.
An absolute global disaster. And that the technology, I mean, that's, for me anyway, a lot of what I've learned is that that's kind of the juggling act at the moment, is trying to make, you know, China figured out a way to deal with their technology, which was the authoritarian approach, but in democratic societies, there needs to be an alternative as well. And it sounds like that's something that you're working on at Voxiberate. So I'm going to have to look into it more. And Please do. I'm very conscious that we've gone a bit over time here, George. It's just such a great conversation. I could listen to it all day. But so, and what is it that you're speaking about at the Web3 conference? We've kind of touched on it maybe, but just to give people a taste.
So I'd like to speak about those issues that we discussed together, just to unpack a few things, just give some examples, and most importantly, enter into a conversation, right? I mean, you know, I think the purpose of the conference, the purpose of our discussion is to have people listen to that, react, you know, engage, right? I think this is a unique opportunity we have. You know, in my lifetime, I've witnessed two big industrial revolutions. You know, the rate of industrial revolutions has accelerated, right? It doesn't happen, okay? And right now we live, it's a new industrial revolution that will change everything. So this is the time where we should get it right, or at least as right as possible, and not repeat the mistakes of the past. So that's my concern, and that's my message, if you like. That's my key message that I'd like to transmit on my talk.
Amazing. Thank you very much, George, and really looking forward to hearing the talk at the conference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. Thank you. And speak again later. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.